talking about. And I wish he could have clarified more. If he had to mention it, if he had to talk about it, he should have gone into more detail to clarify his position. Okay, and I hope he can come out and clarify his position in more detail. Otherwise, he leaves people confused about his position. People will attack him, Muslims and non-Muslims. Non-Muslims will use his vague, ambiguous statements because he's not clearly explaining what he's talking about. I know what he's talking about. I understand what he's talking about, but the masses out there, the Muslims and non-Muslims, do not understand what he's talking about. He needs to come out and he needs to clarify as to what he was talking about. Okay, because missionaries and Islamophobes and Islam haters are using his statements to claim that the Quran is not preserved. Look, a scholar of Islam is saying this. Look, this scholar has written a book on the Quran and he's confused about the Quran. He's not confused. He stated clearly that the Quran, as in the physical copies, is exactly what we read today from the 1st century, right? He's talking about the qira'at, the pronunciation, the reading, the oral delivery of the Quran, how it relates to the pre-Uthmanic reality of the text.
Right.
This is what he's talking about. This is a very academic question, which academics are discussing. He's talking about that. Okay. And he doesn't need to indulge in this. I would advise Dr. Yasir Qadhi to stop indulging in this, because this is not his field. He's not an authority to say. I mean, when he wrote his book, Introduction to the Quranic Sciences, he was a graduate student from Medina University. Okay, he was in his early 20s. He was a student. Okay, I don't know what his exact qualification in the Quran is. What he needs to do, he needs to delegate this task to the Ahlul Quran. He needs to delegate the task to the Ahlul Quran, to the Qur'an, to the masters of the Quran, people who have done PhDs in the Qira'at and they have mastered the transmission of the Quran. He needs to delegate to them, right? Instead of taking it upon himself, talking about the Qira'at and Ahruf and how they correlate and how they relate to each other. Okay, this is my opinion. This is my advice to him as a brother. Okay, I would advise him to avoid making statements that are vague. If you have to make statements, then do lengthy programs like the one we did today and explain your position so people are not left in doubt, because there are people out there, they make all sorts of things, okay, from statements. So it was very unwise, I would say, of Brother Muhammad Hijab and Dr. Qadhi to discuss this in such a brief way and move on. Okay, they should not, leave people confused. They must make things clear. Let's go back to the.
So let me ask you, I want to get clarity. So so you're saying that the point that was made, it was about discussion about how the ahruf relate to the qira'at that we have.
Yes.
But when it comes
not about the text.
Yes.
The text of the Quran is there from the 1st century.
Yeah.
We just read it. We read it today.
So Adnan, tell me one thing. When it comes to, because I think this was mentioned, when it comes to the reading Hafs or Warsh, when we read Hafs and Warsh, this is what was given to us by the Prophet ﷺ.
You are reading Hafs and Warsh from the same Mus'haf, from the same text. As I explained, Hafs, Warsh, Qalun, Duri, Ibn Kathir, all of these different styles of readings are based upon exactly that text you see on the screen. Exactly that text you see on the screen. Okay, Hafs is not different Quran, Warsh is not different Quran. Okay, Qalun or Duri or other readings are not different Qurans. They are one text being read slightly differently.
And all of those different readings are authentically preserved,
transmitted. All of those pronunciations, all of those variants, all of those slight variants are directly traceable back to the Prophet. And this is where the scholars have this opinion that they actually originate in the ahruf, those 7 modes.
Got you.
So these slight variations of readings of the same text of the Quran, which we saw on the screen from the 1st century, originate in those 7 modes. They originate from those 7 modes. This is one of the opinions. Okay, to clarify, this is one of the opinions. And scholars have many other opinions on the nature of ahruf and their relation to the Qira'at. Okay, and classical scholars have written books on this. Okay, Al-Jazari, for example. There is a book by Imam Al-Jazari. Okay, and there is a book, it's a brief book on this issue. Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran by Imam Suyuti, he discusses these matters. Okay, he gives some of the opinions, and there are many books written by other scholars explaining the nature of ahruf and the qira'at, okay, and their relationship with each other. Okay, so let's play the clip again and see what Dr. Qadhi has to say.
Muslim environment, there's always some respect that we have for the Quran. We should. In a Muslim environment, we'll press a little bit and then we'll say, okay, khalas, sami'na wa ata'na. And that's great, alhamdulillah. When you go to academia, they don't have that red line. And they're going to
pause that. When Dr. Qadhi says that Muslims are pressed a little bit and then they sami'na wa ata'na, I think he made a mistake there. Okay, respectfully, he made a mistake there. Okay, Muslims just don't say sami'na wa ata'na. Muslims have studied our Quran. Our scholars have written books on qira'at, detailed books on qira'at. Okay, they have studied this. Imam al-Jazri, I gave you an example, Imam al-Jazri. Okay, go and look at his works and see what he has to say on the qira'at and other scholars. Okay, so it's not just we receive something and we submit to it blindly. No, scholars study. They write lengthy works. They are all available in Arabic. And Orientalists and Western scholars, they are still studying those sciences. And to say the least, I would like to mention this. A lot of these Orientalists actually haven't studied in a lot of depth. Okay, they keep coming up with these new theories. The epistemology of Western scholars, the epistemological lens they use to study Islamic sources is different to the lens we use to study Islamic sources. Our epistemology and the epistemology of Western scholars is not the same. Our epistemology doesn't have to be the same as the epistemology of Western scholars. Epistemology is basically theory of knowledge. How you get to know things. In case people don't know what epistemology is, right? So, for example, I'll give you a very quick example. Western scholars, most of them, they doubt the veracity of hadith literature. Do we have to accept it? Do we have to take it from them? Are they our imams? Are they the ones who will decide for us what we can believe and what we can't believe? Now, more and more as they study Islamic literature, as they go along, as they are making progress in Islamic studies, they are supporting the traditional narrative of Islam. Even hadith, they are now confirming that hadith, okay, is a viable source of history. While in the 1970s and 80s, some of them were very skeptical. Okay, now that revisionist school is being abandoned by modern scholars. A lot of modern scholars are now actually writing works to support the traditional view of Islam when it comes to even hadith. Now, because Western scholars are raising questions about the veracity of hadith, do we leave our epistemology? Do we leave the works of, for example, all the muhaddithin of the past? Do we leave the books of Ilm al-Rijal? Do we, for example, ditch Imam Albani? Do we ditch Sheikh Albani? Do we ditch Imam al-Dhahabi? Do we abandon Ibn al-Hajar al-Asqalani? Do we abandon Imam Nawawi? Do we abandon Ibn Salah? All of these traditional giants who have written books on the science of hadith, just because some Western scholars cannot get their heads around Muslim epistemology, just because they're highly skeptical, just because they want to doubt everything, even their own birth, right? Do we start abandoning the sources of Islam? No, we defend them with solid evidence, physical and otherwise. And we have, wallahi, we have so much evidence, physical, empirical, okay, and otherwise, to support our sources. Let's go forward, inshallah, with the clip.
The emperor with no clothes. They're going to just point out, no, that doesn't make any sense. Well, that's not true, and this and that. And they'll bring issues, which I'm not going to mention explicitly, that you know are true because they're in your own books. They're not inventing anything new. They'll bring you riwayat, and they'll bring you athar, and then you add to that very well-known issues of, I don't even want to be explicit. Then you bring on top of that makhlutat, and then. And it's very clear to you every single...
Dr. Qadhi, if you don't want to be explicit, don't talk about this. If you talk about these things, the Dr. Qadhi keeps saying that I don't want to be explicit. I don't want to be explicit. If you don't want to be explicit, don't talk about these matters because you're confusing people out there. People don't know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. Okay, but people don't know, the awam, the masses don't know what you're talking about. So my request from Dr. Yasir Qadhi is that he needs to come out and needs to clarify more in detail as to what he was talking about exactly for the people to understand, right? And we have done this 2 hours video explaining what we are talking about, and we have done our best to be as clear, as crystal clear as possible about the preservation of the Quran. That's how you need to come out and explain. Okay, there's no point of saying that there are reports there are reports. We know exactly what's there. We know exactly what's there, and we know how our scholars have explained all these reports. Okay, just because Western scholars cannot get their heads around these reports, and just because they cannot accept certain reports, okay, you know, Western scholars, they work in a very funny way. What we deem authentic, they will say no, it doesn't seem authentic. They will leave it. And then they will apply their own self-concocted criteria on Islamic sources, and they will bring something inauthentic from Islamic sources, and they will say this seems to be authentic, and we will go by that. This is how Western academics work. They don't go by our epistemology. They don't follow our boundaries, our limits of authenticity and inauthenticity of hadith or reports. They concoct their own ideas, their own standards, and they go by their own standards. Now, just because they do that, do we have to agree with them? No. We tell them we don't accept your standards, especially when they clash directly with our solid epistemology, Islamic epistemology. It's Islamic theory of the preservation of the Quran and the hadith. And now, thankfully, as we have read the quotes, a lot of them are coming out and they're confirming the veracity of the Quran and the veracity of the hadith literature. So Yasir Qadhi, Dr. Yasir Qadhi, respectfully, he is, I think, you know, he needs to come out and clarify more as to what he was talking about when he talks about Western scholarship. Western scholarship is not be all and do all, is it? Okay, Western scholarship has made major mistakes, and they keep changing. For example, very quickly, Joseph Schacht, he wrote a book, The Origins of the Muhammadan Jurisprudence, in the 60s, in the late 60s, I think. He wrote this book, The Origins of Muhammadan Jurisprudence. And in this book, he plagiarized a theory, or he developed the theory of Ignaz Goldziher. Ignaz Goldziher was a 19th century Jewish Orientalist from Austria who had traveled to Egypt. He studied in Al-Azhar with scholars, okay? And later on, he came up with his own theory that hadith literature was forged in the name of the Prophet and was projected backwards. So people, to support their ideas later on in the 2nd and 3rd century, they came up with ideas. They came up with doctrines, okay, about Islam. And to support those doctrines, they would forge reports, they would forge information, and then